think we are almost there. So, my name is Yeun, and I'm actually a postdoc now at U of T, and I'm excited to share some of my PhD work at UBC about this topic of developing and testing an online intervention to combat social disconnection in different settings. Okay. My work also starts from the issue of loneliness, as we have been talking a lot the past 2 days, which is common experience across different age groups, and which is not just emotionally painful, but also what puts us at the risk for different health problems. And these lines of research alarms us that we should work together to combat this public health challenge together. And the focus of our team was to then how can you address the need for developing and testing evidence-based, effective, but also low-cost and simple intervention to combat this challenge. So as a group of psychologists, we first wanted to understand what happens to our minds when we experience loneliness. And according to the theory and some of the findings, loneliness is supposed to be a helpful emotion, that when we feel lonely, we realize we are lacking something in our daily life, which is essential, the social connection that is essential for our well-being. So it nudges us to go out and reach out and get reconnected to our loved ones. But when that experience becomes chronic and prolongs for longer periods of time, then our mind turns into the self-preservation mode, where we start to feel sensitive to social threats such as getting rejected or getting disadvantaged by other people, which discourages us from engaging in different social opportunities, thinking that I'd just rather be alone, although I have these social needs. The outside world is too scary. And this can create a vicious cycle of chronic loneliness and isolation. So as a psychologist team, we wanted to find a way to break this cycle. So what we did was developing 2-week intervention that introduces small but tangible change to our daily life by getting our participants to engage in prosocial behavior, as we have been talking a lot about, which is voluntary behaviors and acts that we do to benefit another person than ourselves. So here is what we did. If you were our program participants, our program instruction is very simple and clear. For you to perform extra act of kindness in your daily surroundings for 2 weeks every day. And you could choose to whom or what kind of kind acts that you want to perform. And I think I heard lots of examples today. You could check in with someone who is having a grief time, or you could also or give small compliments to your coworkers, or it could be simple thing, giving your seat on the subway because you see somebody looking very tired. So as long as your intention is to do good things for another person, it can fit into this category. So we use different psychological exercises that are known to be effective to promote motivation and behavioral changes that we are not going to talk about today, but if you have any questions about what kind of exercises we use, please reach out to me from this conversation. So the idea behind this was that when we have an intention to benefit another person than ourselves, then we start to lower our guard down, and we are able to get out from the negative loop playing in our mind about other people, and it can start creating a positive social experience as we start to see the smile that we put on another person's face. So our hope was that this program ultimately encouraged them to interact more with other people and ultimately feel less lonely, not just during this intervention time, but also after this program ends. So that's what we tested. So we tested this idea and program in 2 different groups, in 2 different settings. First, university students, and another community adults in BC local neighborhoods who, especially we recruited people who experience at least some degree of loneliness. So what we did to understand if this intervention is effective or not, we compared this kindness program to a control activity, where participants were just asked to take a short break for themselves instead than for others. And we compared these two programs, and our expectation was that participants in the kindness program, they will engage more with other people, and they will report reduced loneliness after this 2-week ends. And we always compare the effect with the control group. So the number of interactions and how many people did you interact today was the measure of the social interactions. We see it as a marker for reduced isolation, whereas the subjective feeling of loneliness was a measure of their loneliness experience. Okay, so I will move on to the results. First, for the first group, university students, the kindness group show increased interactions, especially with close other people after this program ended. And this program was also helpful in reducing daily loneliness that our program participants reported, but particularly among students who started off with high level of loneliness. Next group, community participants, we found that the kindness program also helped them to maintain and sustain the similar number of interactions, or also interaction with close other people compared to the other group. And the kindness program also reduced their daily loneliness level, but not significantly more than the control group, which means that participants in both groups showed reduced loneliness. So we wanted to understand that out of all participants, who are the group of people who will particularly get benefit from this kindness program. And what we found was interesting, which was participants, so community residents who had a high level of social anxiety, they show a clear reduction in loneliness after this kindness program, but not after the taking a break activity. So overall, our hypotheses were partially supported, as you see. What we take away from our findings is that the kindness program might not be a solution for everyone's loneliness or everyone's isolation, as it's hard to find a solution for everybody. But we try to identify, and we learn that there are some groups of people who will particularly respond well to this program and will get benefit from this, such as students with high level of anxiety, or also community adults starting off with having high level of social anxiety. So in conclusion, what's my conclusion? Our goal was to find a way that can reduce people's disconnection, both isolation and loneliness level, with some low-cost and simple way to make changes. And we found that this encouraging someone to engage in prosocial behavior can be one of effective ways that we can consider. As we discussed today, people with loneliness, they are often experiencing different stigma, and we often see them as people who need support from other people, which is also true. But at the same time, I hope that our work encourage and empower future work to consider creative ways to help them to become contributors. Because I think they are able to. I think that's end of my presentation. Wow, I'm so anxious. These are my collaborators and funders who made this work possible. Yeah, and if you have any questions about program or research, please reach out to me at this email. Thank you.
I have to lower this. Can everyone hear me? Great. Hi, everyone. My name's Julia. I'm a second-year PhD student at the University of British Columbia studying health psychology. And today I'll be talking about characterizing volunteerism in Canada, looking at motivators, barriers, and guidelines for increased accessibility. Okay, so Yeun talked about acts of kindness as a prosocial behavior, something we can do to help the people around us. I'll be focusing on volunteering, which we define as an activity that's done by an individual, uncoerced, unpaid, and structured by an organization directed towards a community concern. And so I want you to reflect if you've ever volunteered before. I think many of us here have. If you have volunteered, what were some of the reasons you initially got started volunteering? What were some of the things that maybe made volunteering a little difficult? And if you haven't volunteered, is there a reason for that, or is there a cause that you might be interested in volunteering for? And these kinds of questions led us to the work that I'll discuss today, in which we were looking at motivators for and barriers to engaging in volunteering. So we know that volunteering benefits communities and individuals. Starting with the benefit to communities, we see that volunteering in Canada in 2018 involved 24 million Canadians giving 5 billion hours of their time. And this contributed about 2.5 million full-time jobs worth of economic value to their communities. Not only does volunteering benefit communities, it's also really beneficial to the individual doing the volunteering. We see that volunteering is repeatedly associated with improved health and well-being outcomes for the volunteer, including things like increased social activity and meaning, a strengthening of social networks and support, improved cognitive and mental health, healthier lifestyles. Volunteering has also been shown to buffer against the negative effects of stress, and it's even been associated with the reduced risk of mortality. In one group of older adults who volunteered 2 hours per week or more over the course of a year, they had a 44% reduced risk of mortality 4 years later. And despite all of these great health and well-being benefits of volunteering, we see that it's on the decline, as we've heard from some people today. In 2022, 67% of Canadian nonprofits struggled to recruit new volunteers. 35% had to reduce the scope of services they provided, and 17% had to cancel their services altogether. And so here we again ask, what are motivations for and barriers to engaging in volunteering in order to increase volunteerism in Canada? So we use data from the 2022 wave of the Canadian Social Connection Survey. We restricted the sample to people who had volunteered, so this was about 1,200 participants, and I won't get into the details of the sample too much since Kiffer talked about them yesterday, but we see that our sample is fairly evenly distributed across age groups, primarily women, white, and from urban environments. So the first thing we did was to look at motivations for volunteering quantitatively. And we did this using the volunteer functions inventory, which looks at 6 different motivations for volunteering. And I'll just quickly run through these. So this includes volunteering based on values, so a desire to express one's altruistic values, protective motivations, a desire to reduce one's own negative feelings or emotions, career motivations, volunteering for career growth, social motivations, a desire to foster social connection, understanding motivations, a desire to learn and practice new skills, and enhancement or self-development motivations. And this is just a graph showing the sort of average levels of these different kinds of motivations, one being that the volunteers rated this as not at all an important or accurate motivation, and 7 being that they thought this was extremely important or accurate. And you'll see that most of these fall around the middle, but career, social, and protective motivations tend to fall on the less important side of things, while understanding, enhancement, and values tend to fall on the more important side of things. The next thing we did was called a latent profile analysis, and this is to look at types of volunteers. It's essentially a way to look at some underlying patterns in the data. And so you'll notice that I use some kind of cartoon figures on this next slide. These are sort of stereotypical, and they're just meant to help us differentiate between groups, but obviously don't represent everyone in a given group of volunteers. So here we found 6 different types of volunteers. And when I say types, I just mean that these volunteers clustered similarly based on their motivations. Our first type we describe as having diverse motivations. They scored really highly on all of these motivations. They thought all of these motivations were really important reasons that they engaged in volunteer work. Green here will mean above average, red on future slides will mean they were below average, and gray will just sort of mean in the middle. So this group was really highly motivated across all types of motivation. They're mostly middle-aged. They were the group that was most likely to have non-binary participants, and one of our more ethnically diverse and lower-income groups. Our second type we classify as being growth and values motivated. This group strikes me as being mostly retired women who are really motivated by values and understanding and enhancement, but are not really career motivated. The next type was primarily values motivated. This is probably mostly working women who are really motivated by values, maybe not as much by other things. Most of them work, so maybe they don't need as much of the career and social and enhancement motivations. Our fourth type was career motivated, and this was also our largest category. This was our youngest group, most likely to be employed, and also most likely to be non-white. Our fifth group was, had motivations other than values and growth. They're one of the younger groups with the highest percentage of men and mostly white and lower income. And then our final group, which I found really interesting, we described as having motivations that weren't really captured in our study. They rated all of these motivations as being unimportant as for their reasons for engaging in volunteering. And so this led us to do some focus group interviews that are currently in progress, where we could ask participants directly, what are the reasons that you engage in volunteering, what's motivating you, and what are some barriers that you're facing? And just to give you kind of an overview, we've done focus group interviews for participants with disabilities, participants living in rural areas and living on low income, and we have a few more coming up that we hope to finish by the end of the month. And so I'm just going to kind of high-level overview a few quotes that I thought were particularly interesting. There was one woman who lives in a rural environment who said that probably 2/3 of the people that they know are through volunteering. Others described the benefits of joining your community, seeing where they've helped, and someone even described it as giving them like a sense of inner peace when they're able to do their volunteer work. What I thought particularly interesting from these interviews is the barriers that people have shared. I'll share a couple here. So one was that there was a volunteer who said that they found that volunteer organizations actually seemed resistant to adopt new members, that they found the culture seemed exclusive and they didn't really feel welcomed. And so that was a big barrier for them engaging in volunteer work. A lot of people also talked about the costs of volunteering, both in terms of time and money. So people described things like, I have to pay a lot to get transportation to go to the volunteer site, or the volunteer sessions run through meal times, and then I'm out and I don't have time to get home and make dinner, so I have to purchase meals. And so really interesting insights from people, and we're excited to hear the rest of those. We also asked them for suggestions that they had in terms of like, what would you recommend that volunteer organizations do? And there were some really interesting ones that came up, things like tax credits for volunteers, like how people who make donations get tax credits and things like that. And we're really excited to share those suggestions and barriers and motivations with volunteer organizations at the end of this year in December, where we're going to share what the volunteer said and get organizations' thoughts on, what here might be feasible to implement. So I know I went through these types of volunteers super quickly, but the main overarching message here is that different groups of people have really different reasons for engaging in volunteer work. And so rather than recruiting volunteers generally, I think there needs to be a more targeted approach to try to understand and meet the needs of different volunteers and why they might be interested in volunteering. And then for those of whom we don't understand their motivations, I think we really need to have further discussions with volunteers about what's motivating them. I think one thing that really came out of these conversations is that volunteers really want to feel respected and valued. They're giving so much of their time, often to a cause that's really important to them. And so yeah, they want to know that they're valued and important, and to be recognized for the work that they're doing. With that, I will thank all of my collaborators and funders and stop there. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. If I could get Yeyun and Julia to come join me. So the research that we just heard about is why I do what I do. There's nothing I love to nerd out on more than research on kindness and volunteering, and I love that I'm in a room of other people who similarly love to do that. My background is in public health, and so we've been hearing a lot today about the importance of weaving connection into our workplaces, into our healthcare, and all these other areas that influence the society around us. And what I love about these insights that we just heard about is that it really brings it back to the individual. And I think that's actually a beautiful way to close today, that each of us can take these simple yet very powerful and meaningful actions to connect and make a difference in our own sense of loneliness and connection, as well as other people's. So I'd love to go into some questions. I'll start with one, but then please, I hope you're all thinking of some as well. I would love to hear a little bit more, Yeyun, you mentioned specific acts of kindness and what those looked like. I also, when I was an undergraduate at Queens, did 108 days of acts of kindness. You'll have to read my book next year to find out why 108, but I can personally say it was very, very meaningful. So I'd love to hear what were some of those ideas of things that people did to actually reach out.
Yeah, can you hear me well? Yeah, I think, so I had two different groups. One was university students, and the other group was community adults. What they did and to whom they perform acts of kindness were a little bit different. I think for students, they report a lot that their recipients were their close friends or close family members. Almost 60-70% of their acts of kindness were toward their friends, like going, asking someone out for dinner, trading some nice snacks for their friends, or texting a friend who is going through breakup and things like that. Whereas the community adults, they show more diversified acts of kindness. I think that's partially because they spend their time in very different settings. So they talked a lot about doing something for neighbors, like checking in with neighbors. Of course, something for their family members and close others as well, but also toward neighbor, the stranger that they didn't know who live in the neighborhood, going to a grocery shopping and they saw someone and give, let them go first before them, or giving a hand if someone is carrying heavy things. So I see really different acts that they were performing, but at the same time, I see that people kind of adapted it into their daily settings, depending on where they spend lots of time in.
Wonderful. Well, I would challenge everyone today, when you leave, to find one small way, perhaps inspired by some of those suggestions, that you can do an act of kindness for someone who's not in this room. I think if each of us does that, that'll have some powerful ripple effects. So as you're thinking about questions, and please raise your hand in a moment, I'd love to hear more about specific ways that we can encourage volunteering that have been inspired by the research that you've been doing. I think we heard from this speaker at Big Brothers Big Sisters that that's been an issue for them recently too. So I'm wondering if you have specific suggestions that are inspired by what you're studying.
Yeah, definitely. I think the research is definitely still in progress, and so I don't have, a finalized set of recommendations or guidelines. But I think really a lot of what's inspired my recent thoughts about that is the focus groups, and what people said about just wanting to feel respected and welcomed. Another one that came up a lot was really difficult and intensive trainings that actually were quite expensive for volunteers. Things like security checks, 3, 4, 5 days worth of training where they had to miss work, and just things like that, where we could maybe think creatively about how to sort of streamline training and onboarding to make it easy on volunteers, to make them feel like it's like make them feel excited about it rather than nervous about all of the different things, like the barriers they have to hop to engage.
Wonderful. How much time do we have?
I think we've got 3 questions.
Okay, perfect. Anyone have a question? Yes, okay, Prashir, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I guess I'm just curious in terms of the motivations that people share behind whether it's volunteering or prosocial behavior, whether you've found or maybe hypothesized that there are some hesitations for voicing particular motivations. I'm just thinking maybe not wanting to say it's for a career because that may seem a bit self-serving. Or, you know, I think one issue with pursuing programs that are addressing social isolation and loneliness is that you don't want to say that you're engaging in this program because you're lacking that in your life. And so is there a sense of not wanting to voice that concern? So I'm just curious if that showed up in your research or maybe how that might inform some of the analysis and findings.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that we definitely have to be thoughtful about the framing. And I think really, rather than having people shy away from saying, I'm really motivated by career, encouraging that. I know lots of people who are motivated to volunteer for career reasons, and especially in young people. That's great. What can organizations do to I guess almost promote that? Like, this is a great way for you to get experience, might be a way to attract volunteers, and then the volunteers are benefiting from that. But definitely I think we have to, just be really thoughtful about the ways in which we advertise. And also just the fact that everyone's got really different motivations, and I think that's actually a good thing. How can you connect people who come to your organizations with their specific skills and the things they want to practice and learn? I talked to a woman who was really interested in like a specific kind of like genealogy mapping, which is a very specific thing, and she got connected with her church, and they really needed someone who was willing to do that, and like it just led to this amazing history of volunteering for her. And so really capitalizing on people's interests, I think, is great.
If I add to that, that's actually my ongoing question that I'm trying to tackle. So in our study, the participants didn't know what our hypothesis was, and they didn't know that what we want to see is how acts of kindness is helpful to reduce loneliness or increase social interactions. They didn't know that because we didn't want to let them think I'm doing this to reduce my loneliness or increase my social engagement. So when I think about how to scale this up for broader use in community, I think that would be my next research question. Does self-focused motivation, does it really hamper the effects? If so, how can we encourage and motivate people, and how we would frame this kind of movement or initiative to be able to be effective for people with high social anxiety or high level of loneliness? That's why I like all the stories that I heard here, is that just the movement that comes starting from community, not targeting specific individual with high loneliness or high social anxiety. I think it just creates the culture of being more prosocial and being able to reach out to people. And I think that kind of indirectly encourage people to do and perform more acts of kindness without telling them that you gotta do this for your own loneliness.
If I can just quickly say one quick thing. I also know that with volunteering, the motivations matter to the extent that when you look at mortality as an outcome, there's studies that have found that people who volunteer entirely for self-motivated reasons don't experience the same benefits. They don't have a reduced risk of mortality. But I do think that no matter how you can get people in the door, oftentimes motivations will change. So even if it starts for an entirely self-focused reason, you might eventually, realize, oh, I really love mentoring this person, or I'm really passionate about this cause. So.
Hi, you two. Great job. Big fan of your work, both of you. Julia, if you'd be up for sending me the code for your cluster analysis, I'm really interested in seeing how that works. Great work.
Yeah.
Kind of question for both of you that touches on some of these themes. I'm being struck by the more I learn about ways of helping people increase their social health, it seems that sometimes we almost have to trick them into helping themselves by helping others. Like, it seems that some people are more motivated by altruism than they are by a desire to help their own social well-being. Franco's work speaks to this as well, where seniors had to kind of be tricked into participating in a thing for their social health. They were tricked into increasing their social health by saying it was for the youth who were volunteering to communicate with them. So basically, yeah, they were apparently not that responsive to the call to participate in the Connection Link program until they were told that they were mentoring the youth, at which point they all of a sudden became interested in participating, and this, you know, allowed them to engage with a program that increased their social health. So it's interesting. We think that humans are so cynical and self-motivated. It's really interesting to see the ways in which a lot of people are altruistic and more motivated by altruism than self-interest a lot of the time. And I'm wondering if you all are thinking more about this, like what proportion of the population seem to be altruism-oriented? And one hypothesis I have about this is that coming at it from an angle of how I can help other people is kind of a position of power and agency, whereas like saying I need help, I need to increase my social well-being, is kind of admitting that you're kind of weak in a sense, which is a sad way to put it, but people might feel that way. And I'm wondering if I could just get more of your thoughts, given your expertise in the area, about this.
I agree with your observation. I think motivation is very important. And I think you ask how much of the population would be driven by altruism versus the other. My intuition is that it's not that some people are driven by altruism and some other people are driven by other things. I think we are all like flexible depending on how we encourage them and motivate them. I think people can have different motivation for the same activity and therefore have different effects and outcomes from the same participation. So when I was also designing this intervention, I really tried to motivate their altruistic motivation. So we asked them, have you heard about saying is believing exercise? Which is we wanted them to believe in the power of altruism. So we asked them to share their experience and explain to somebody else that how altruism could impact their life in a positive way. So by writing that out for someone else, they could actually have more altruistic motivation for the activity. So I think the way to go is how we can more tap into this, their suppressed or hidden, or they already have this altruistic motivation that are suppressed by other factors. How can you kind of help them to grow and make it act out of this motivation? I think that's important thing that I should continue thinking when I think about intervention.
That's great. I'll just quickly add that I think in general people really want to help others, and they go about this in a variety of ways. So maybe around 40% of Canadians are engaging in volunteering, which is what I saw in this sample. It was around 40%. But we see that people are helping in so many other ways: small acts of kindness, informal helping behaviors like getting groceries. And Stats Canada recently released something that showed that those informal helping behaviors are so much more common. It's like 75%. So most Canadians are doing those things. So yeah, I like to think that there's a desire for everyone to help and contribute.
I think just building off of Adam's question and even Prashir's comments, there's a part of me that makes we're making an assumption that people understand what's in it for them. And I think at this point, as we talk about social connection and human connection, we've been told for 50 years that volunteering is about helping other people and that random acts of kindness are about helping other people. And I think we have before we can really make an assessment of whether, what is driving it, we have to make sure that they're as conscious about what's in it for them. What are the benefits to them from a social connection? When I hear about volunteering, when I share with people, oh, did you realize that when you volunteer, you get connected with an empathetic and compassionate group of people who are there handing out the food or doing whatever it is you choose to do? Most people go, wow, I never even thought about that. And so I think what we need to recognize is we aren't at a societal level of consciousness that goes, oh my God, that's a simple thing. Even when you had social in one of the drivers of engagement, to me, I think a lot of people, you saw it was the second last determinant or the driver, is I don't even think most people even make that connection. I think they literally just think, oh, this is about helping other people. Why would, and when we're in times of crisis and lots of stress in our lives, maybe we don't actually think about some of the other things other than, oh, well, I don't have time to help that person, because we don't recognize, oh my God, it's about me as well, whether it's random acts of kindness or volunteering. So my original question was going to be, did you find people who were kind of like, oh wow, social? I didn't even think about social in both sides of it. You know, it made me feel good from random acts of kindness, or, you know, what did I get out of building a network because I went to volunteering? But I'm not sure if you were able to pull that out from the questions.
I saw that a bit in focus groups. Someone would bring up like, oh, I really benefit from, the social aspect, or I've really benefited from, it was really novel things. Like I actually found my current job through starting volunteering and the connections and network that formed. And then other people would kind of look shocked and then go, oh yeah, the same thing happened to me. And so there is that like shared, I think I totally agree with what you said. Like people aren't often even aware of like all the benefits and kind of their reasons. And so like more education around that is super important.
Wonderful. I took a quick search on volunteermatch.com, and there were almost 80,000 volunteer opportunities in Toronto alone. So there are many organizations who are needing this support, but also to tie it all together, I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of sending a text to someone we already know, reaching out in those simple acts of kindness in the networks that we're already part of, because of how powerful that is. And thank you both for leading this research and for helping us understand that.